Hello and welcome to the Lafayette Church of Christ. Right quick, I'd like to welcome everyone, especially our visitors tonight, and I'm glad everyone is here. Around 3 weeks ago, we had our VBS, and the theme was the life of Moses. And our 2019 Last Leaders theme is Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. One of our VBS nights was about the 10 plagues of Egypt, and that will also be our subject tonight. First off, I'll talk about the 10 plagues, what they were, and what caused them. First off, the Israelites were in captivity because Pharaoh was afraid they would rise up and enslave the Egyptians, so Pharaoh enslaved them first. Think of Exodus chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. In Exodus chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And it reads, "And he said to his people, Look, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. And therefore they sent taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses." When Moses, another Israelite who was also the Pharaoh's daughter's son, tried to set his people free, but Pharaoh's heart hardened, and Moses said that God would put 10 plagues upon Egypt. The definition of plague is a thing causing trouble or irritation. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty rock-solid definition. Now I'll tell those who may not know what the 10 plagues consisted of. The first plague was water turned to blood. The second plague was frogs. The third was lice. The fourth plague was flies. The fifth plague was sick livestock. The sixth plague was boils. The seventh was hail. The eighth, locusts. The ninth plague was darkness. And the 10th and the final plague, which was the death of the firstborn. Now there's an underlying purpose for each plague, as an in-depth study of Egyptian mythology showed that God challenged the Egyptian gods and goddesses. The first plague, water turned to blood, was a slap in the face to many gods in the Egyptian pantheon. For example, Khnum was the god of the river source, and Hapi was the god of annual flooding and lord of the fish. The second plague, frogs, insulted Heat, a goddess with the head of a frog. The third plague, lice, was related to Geb, a god of the dust of the earth, and the lice came from the dust of the earth. The fourth plague, flies, was Khepri, who had the head of a beetle and moved the sun. The fifth plague, sick cattle, Ithathor was a fertility goddess who is often depicted to have the head of a bull. The sixth plague, boils, Isis was the goddess of health, and the god Imateth was the god of healing, which both of them couldn't heal the Egyptians while they had the boils. The seventh plague, hail, Nut was the goddess of the sky, and her father, Shu, the god of wind and air, was a calming god. The eighth plague, locusts, Napier was the god of grain. The ninth plague, darkness, Ra, god of the sun, was the most revered god after the Pharaoh. And the 10th plague, death of the firstborn, this humiliated all the gods and goddesses in Egypt, including Pharaoh. First, Egypt killed the Israelite infant boys, and now God had killed the Egyptian firstborn. Now, looking at what God did to the Egyptians can only give me one thing to think about: God's power. In Romans 13:1 gives us a great example of that power. It reads, "Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. God picks people to enforce the law. And to create the laws. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created us and everything around us. He created us, the trees and animals, and everything else we see on a daily basis. Throughout all of mankind's existence, no matter how smart and powerful we will get, we will be no match to God's power. Now, as we conclude this message, we have seen how powerful and loving our God is. To free the Israelites and to show the Egyptians that he is God. In Exodus 12:12, God says to Moses, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." This shows that the plagues did show that he is God over the Egyptian gods. And in verse 30 of that same chapter, it reads, "So Pharaoh rose in that night, he and all the Egyptians, and there was a cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead." This shows God's ultimate power. On a final note, if there's anyone tonight who has troubles or sin in their life, baptized or not, and would like to come forward to either be baptized, or if you are already baptized and want to be forgiven, for any reason, come forward as we stand and sing.